is so much that lives inside of us, and there are times when what is inside feels like too much to carry. And as the weight is heavy and the clouds surround, our hearts are looking for a light in the dark.
Welcome you if you're joining us today. If you don't know me, I'm Pastor Brad. I am just thrilled that you're here with us. Thanks for joining in person, here in the building, joining online, and connecting in that way. We are in the middle of a discussion on something that maybe often isn't actually discussed, or at least discussed frankly or openly in the church. We're talking about issues of mental health. And we're talking about it in this framework of being a light in the dark. And we started our whole series out, we're in week 3 now, we started the whole series out with this idea, namely that the darkness is real. It's not fake. It's not fake news. It's not this made up thing. It's not just something that people use as an excuse, but the darkness that we walk through, the dark places, are real. And we know that because our world is filled with sin and with brokenness. And we've all felt that effect in one way or another. But for some of us, and really, I think honestly all of us, at one point or another, we really do wrestle with health on the mental side that is not all that it could be. Remember, we talked about it as far as a spectrum, meaning you're not mentally healthy or mentally unhealthy, but you're somewhere on that spectrum one way or the other. And that even if right now, maybe you're in a place of great light. You're not walking through the darkness, but there are others around you that are. And so if you're in that place of light, you have the opportunity, you have the, I might even say the obligation as someone who is walking in the light to shine some of that into the dark places for others. And we said that's important because the only way to dispel the darkness in our lives or the lives of others is to let the light in. And then that was all for week 1. Then last week we talked about what are really the two most primarily diagnosed, the most readily diagnosed conditions when it comes to mental health, and that's the area of anxiety and depression. And we didn't answer all the questions or all the different characterizations, or we didn't come up with treatment plans or anything, but we said this, that at its core, and that the Bible speaks to these things, that anxiety and depression are mainly driven by fear and anger. That those things that make us afraid, we get anxious about. Those things that we're angry about create depression in us when they're not resolved. So last week you were challenged as a church family to write 2 lists. And I hope you did it. I really do. Hope you wrote the 2 lists, the things that make you angry, the things that bring about fear in your life. And I hope you took the next step and shared it with someone. I want to tell you this. Our life group that we meet on Monday nights, we did that. We discussed it a little bit at our meeting on Monday night, and then throughout the week we shared it actually on our group Facebook page that we have. And I'm not going to speak for everybody. I want you to know, for one, it bonded me to the others in our group in a unique way when they shared vulnerably about those deep core things. But it was also very, very good to put my stuff out there amongst others and let them shine their light in on it, to know that they are part of it with me. That those things that I shared that bring about fear in my life, you know what, they're not quite as fearful for me anymore. Those things that make me angry, I now have deepened perspective on. I know that others are there with me to walk with me when I get angry about them. So hopefully you did that because it was powerful. And if you didn't yet, let me encourage you, stick with it, do it, step out in that, because this is a great way, a great starting point to letting light shine into darkness. But that was about anxiety and depression. This week, we're going to talk about something that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt every single person in this room in one degree or another has struggled with, that you've wrestled with, that you've suffered through. And that's the idea of loneliness. The idea of being alone, even sometimes when you're in the midst of a crowd. And before we dig too much deeper, and I want you to know, again, remind you that we owe a debt of gratitude to our sister church in Norton, Ohio, who helped provide some of the framework for this. And I actually have a couple quotes from Pastor Dan Gregory, who initially kind of put this together, where he really speaks to some of the stuff that happens here when it comes to loneliness. But loneliness is not just I'm bummed out because I didn't get to go with my friends on Saturday. Okay? We have these characterizations, these caricatures of some of the stuff that we struggle with as being blown up or not that big of a deal, or it's why are you so worried about that? Why does that bother you so much? But loneliness is serious. Mother Teresa was quoted as saying this: loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty. This is Mother Teresa, who worked with the most neglected in the world. There's an organization that has formed and they call themselves the Cost of Loneliness Project, and they dig into some of the scientific stuff that accompanies the experience of loneliness. And they said that loneliness-induced stress, okay, so stress that comes from being lonely, impacts cortisol release in the body, which increases carbohydrate cravings and leads to weight gain, as well as complications for those who have issues, for instance, with insulin, someone who's in the diabetic world. So being lonely can make you gain weight and can affect your overall health, especially if you're a diabetic. It's associated with a 32% greater risk of stroke. You are more likely to have a stroke, almost a third more likely if you're lonely. And they also went on to talk about some of the causes of loneliness, and some of the causes, or some of maybe the preconceptions that we have for what causes loneliness, I might be stepping on some of those for you today. But I'll say this: one of the ones that I looked at and I amened heartily was this: what causes loneliness? And this is just some of it, but it's a decline, I'll just quote it, in communal religious affiliation, participation in marriage or the delayed onset of marriage, and decline in neighborhood and community associations. So getting together with your church family, being involved in your community, and making a commitment in marriage, those things declining increases loneliness. And they're saying not just that if you do that it will, but because that is happening, loneliness is increasing. They also say that a decline in overall time spent in outdoor communal activity, as well as increased time at work and decreased time using actual vacation amongst those employed, these are also causes of loneliness. We're working harder and longer. We're not taking our vacation. And we're not doing stuff together. We are isolating ourselves. There was a major kind of healthcare company, Cigna. Okay, they've done a study in 2018 and 2020, and I'm bringing some information from there, very scientific, very broad study on loneliness. And this is actually the 2018 Cigna US Loneliness Index, survey of over 20,000 Americans. And they help define what this loneliness really is, and especially significant loneliness. This isn't like, oh, well, I had plans to go out with my friends this weekend, but something happened, I got sick and I couldn't go, so I'm a little lonely now. We're talking about loneliness that has a significant impact on life, similar to what we talked about last week. It's not just, well, I got a little worried that a test was coming, or I'm a little sad because some sad thing happened, but it's ongoing. It has chronic impact. Here's what happens with chronic loneliness. It's an inability to connect with others on a deeper, more intimate level. You have many acquaintances, but no or very few best or close friends. You have feelings that no one actually gets you. There's overwhelming feelings of isolation, even when you're surrounded by others, maybe dozens of people, like at a party. You have negative feelings of self-doubt, questioning yourself and your own self-worth. There's also feelings of being exhausted when you actually try to engage in social activities. So the very thing, some of the stuff that we'll talk about that you need to do to overcome the loneliness that might be going on inside you, man, it's going to wipe you out to try to do it. And when something wipes you out, what's our general reaction to something that makes us tired? Let me tell any of you who have signed up for a gym, went once and never went back. You avoid it, you stop it, right? Oh, that was really hard. I don't want to do that. Even if you know, oh, well, that'll help if I do it, but oh, that was so hard. That's work when you're actually really, really lonely. To try to move past it, to try to engage a community, it's hard work. You get exhausted. But let me tell you, it's important. But to continue to talk about the fact that this is not just a little excuse for people, but this is a real problem. They created this scale, this index. And the average American on a scale from 0 to 100, 0 being not lonely at all, 100 being totally lonely, average American is basically 44% lonely. So 4 out of 10, okay, 4 out of 10 times, over 4.5 times out of 10, you're lonely in your life, on average. And so there's people on either end of the scale for sure, but this gives you a picture of where we're at as America. If you look at some of the stats that they provide in this study, 54% of those who responded, of the 20,000 people who responded, 54% said either always or sometimes to this statement, "No one knows me well." For half of America, thinks that nobody knows them well. 46% said they always feel alone. 47% they feeling left out. 2 out of 5, so around 40%, say that they lack companionship, relationships aren't meaningful, they're isolated from others, and they're no longer close to anyone. 20,000 people across the United States surveyed in this way, and those are the findings. If you dig a little bit deeper in, at least a third of all the participants experienced these significant feelings. And if you would dig into these are the more significant, so it's not just like on the 44 side, but more towards the 60 or higher. They have these significant experiences of loneliness, but only roughly 1 out of 5 of the participants, only about 20%, say they never experienced loneliness. So only 20% roughly of the US population says, "No, I'm not lonely, I'm never lonely." That means 80% of us on one level or another are struggling with loneliness. Now, here's one that I found really interesting. They found no correlation between social media use alone and feelings of loneliness. That means that social media use is not causal or a correlated factor in experience of loneliness, because I have heard this more times than I can count. Well, if people would just get off social media. Now, there are issues that are definitely accompanying social media, but it's a false argument to think, well, if you just get off Facebook, you just get off Twitter, you just get off Snapchat, you get into real relationships, that this would be fixed. Because across the spectrum of those who use it all the time to those who never use it, there's no statistically significant variation in the responses. So it's not social media that's the problem. We got to get that one out. But at the same time, here's one that I thought was really, really interesting. Even though, because of social media, we are more connected than ever before. We can connect to more people, regardless of how old we are, where we live, any of that stuff. Here's what we found. Gen Z is the loneliest generation and claims to be in worse health than any of the older generations. It's not because of social media. So we have to separate those two. It's not the social media use, but our youngest generation, those are the ones that are the most lonely. And it's factors outside of social media that have developed this pandemic of loneliness in our younger generations. I want to say that's why one of the reasons why we as Grace Church, we value so strongly developing kids and students, and we lean heavily in our efforts to reach them. Why? Because they need it. Our kids, our youngest generation, are in a desert, a drought, a famine of connection. They are lonely, and there are major effects of loneliness on our human experience. This is from another resource. It's called Happify, believe it or not, but they bring together a lot of scientific research around various health-related things, and this one was about loneliness. They have, if you're looking for some of the sources, they have like 10 different studies they use to put this together. They have figured out that loneliness is worse for you than smoking on your overall health for the factors it brings in. They say it's worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day as you factor in all the complications. There's increased risk of heart disease, of dementia, and of depression, all associated with loneliness. And then, of course, all the health concerns that come with each of those. And there's actually an increased risk of death, don't miss this, an increased risk of death at any given time by 29%. When you're in the throes of loneliness, you're nearly a third more likely to die than at any other point of your life. Well, they go on and say, they look at the idea that this isn't just uniquely an American experience. If you look across the world, then it's very similar, like very similar between the US and Britain or England. But then also, like if you go out to Japan, where some of the family stuff is still very ingrained in culture, they only represent 9% of the population being at the highest levels of loneliness. Now, I found this very, very interesting. About half of all those who report having experienced loneliness, like in these surveys, half of those have been struggling with it for at least 6 years. This is a chronic condition. And I don't know if you've ever wrestled with a chronic condition, because it moves beyond the immediate symptoms. It begins to wiggle and weave its way into all areas of your life. And that's what loneliness does. It sticks with you. When it's not addressed, it just digs roots deep. And in Britain, 41%, catch that? 41% of those over 65 say either a pet or a TV is their primary companion. A pet or a TV is their primary companion. Let me tell you, church, this is not what we were designed for. And yet we wrestle with it. Now, I say that not to depress you. I know that probably sounds very depressing, but one of the things I think it's important for us to do is to recognize, one, that the darkness is real, because sometimes we try to pretend that it's not. The darkness is real, but the only way to dispel the darkness, what is it, church? Let in the light. But if we don't realize there's darkness there, we're not going to shine the light. So I think it's important. But the fact is, loneliness is a human problem. It's not a specific generation's problem, even though some suffer with it worse. It's not one geographic area is a problem, but maybe some are worse or better off, but it is an entire human problem. And I can say that because the very first problem we find in the biblical story, the Bible that we say we live by, that we believe in, we say that God's absolutes are what, church? Absolutely good. And in that book that we say is absolutely good, all that God has to share, there's one problem that is presented before any other. And that problem is primarily loneliness. That problem primarily is the lack of relationship. Now, before we hop into that, where the Bible says, if you want to, we're going to look real quick. We're going to be skipping all over the place. We're going to be looking in Genesis chapter 1 for just a few moments. But I want to say this. The darkness doesn't always seem dark. Okay? The darkness does not always seem dark. When you're in the darkness, you don't recognize it to be as dark as it is. Maybe your eyes have adjusted a little bit to it. You don't recognize the darkness. But sometimes when you're outside the darkness, maybe you don't really recognize that it's so dark for somebody. If you're in a place right now where you're saying, man, my relationship tank is full. I'm getting together with people all the time. I've got very meaningful relationships. People go deep with me. I'm never at a loss for somebody to care about me and talk to me and just be with me. If that is you, praise the Lord. And I mean that extremely sincerely. Praise the Lord. But you have a very unique situation if that's the case. And chances are, just having had some conversations where people say, oh no, I'm not lonely, when you dig into it, there's probably a lot of loneliness there that you're not willing to recognize. Because sometimes you don't recognize the darkness when you're in it, but it's also when you're feeling so good, it looks like maybe nobody else really has a problem, or maybe that's not as dark as they think it is. We've got to recognize the darkness for others. When people are in the darkness, you're scared. When you're in the darkness, you do things you wouldn't otherwise do. We shared that story about my son down in the basement. Let me share another story. When we were kids, we would go on vacation up into Canada to a place in Ontario called Lake Elgin. Okay, you go back miles. No, it was Elgin was the town. It was Lake Opinican, but the town was Elgin. My mom is here correcting me. Okay, now that we got the facts straight, it was town of Elgin, Lake Opinican, but you would go back miles down this dirt road. I mean, it was you were in a cabin, but it was not the Four Seasons by any stretch. Okay, but we're back there, and you would be in these cabins on this lake. And I remember one night. I remember all of the situation around it, but I was in a room. And I had to get out. I was sleeping. I think I had to go to the bathroom or something. And it was an unfamiliar place. And when I woke up, it was pitch black dark in this room. I couldn't find my way out. And I started panicking. I was screaming and shoving things. I was falling over, trying to get to the door. And I think it had one of those locks on the door where you just turn it a little, and then the doorknob doesn't move anymore. Well, if you're inside a room where it locks from the inside, right, what do you do to get out? You turn it a quarter turn and the door unlocks. Everybody knows it. Even as a kid, I knew it. But somehow that door had gotten locked, maybe as I was trying to open it, and it wouldn't move, and it wouldn't move, and I started freaking out and screaming and panicking. And then someone on the other side was actually trying to open the door, but what had I done to the door? I had locked the door. I would never lock myself in a room when I needed to get out if I was under normal circumstances, but because of the darkness, I was panicking, and I was scared, and I was unsure, so I had locked it. I couldn't get it open. The person on the other side couldn't get it open. Finally, somehow, I don't know if just enough force was used or I eventually flipped it over, my dad was able to open the door. And it was still dark, but it was lighter out there than where I was. And because there was more light and I saw my dad, I ran and grabbed him. I burst through that opening in the door because being with my dad made it okay. The darkness was still there, but with my dad it was a little bit lighter. But it wasn't even necessarily that I could now handle my situation. It was because in my panic, my father was there. When we let light into the darkness, we have the opportunity to run to our Father, to run to our Creator, the one who will never let us down. That is what we can do. That is what we're encouraging everyone who's hearing this to do, to run from the darkness into the light, into the arms of the Father who's waiting. We might have locked our own door to our darkness, but we have the opportunity to run as he cracks it open. Now, Genesis 1, we have an incredible story of the creation of the world. We're going to move real quick. I want us to look. It's going to be tough to follow along, but looking right here. Oh, I went the wrong direction. We're looking right here at verse 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was what? Good. Okay, we're going to skip down to verse 10. God called the dry land earth after he created it, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. All right, now we're at verse 12. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. Guys, you are just with me. I like this. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars, and God saw that it was good. So God created the great sea creatures, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. We're not done yet. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Oh, we're still not done. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created a male and female. He created them. And God saw that God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was oh, I tripped some of you up. Very good. But look here in verse 18. Then the Lord, and this is, Genesis 2. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now, we can't go into all the stuff of what it means that God made humanity in his image, male and female, or what it means that there was a helper and that it was fit, but that's deeper and broader than probably we ever really give thought to. But the whole big picture here, he creates all this stuff, and it's good. And then with the crowning achievement of creating humanity in his own image, he ups his ante and says, "It's very good." And then, after he gives Adam his job, and Adam is naming creatures and doing this stuff, says that there was no suitable match for Adam in all the created order. He says that it was not good that he be alone. See, humanity was made to be with humanity. This is before there was sin. This is before there's brokenness. This is not a bad situation that God is redeeming. He's just saying it's not all that it should be. That humanity to be what God designed us to be requires relationship, and a special kind of relationship. Now, if you know the story after this, sin does enter the world. Humanity breaks what God offered. And the break is primarily not that all of a sudden humanity doesn't follow the rules, but humanity chooses to separate itself from the Creator. It creates a relationship break between the divine and the created. That's the primary issue of sin. But here, where it's not good for him to be alone, and God creates this incredible helper fit for him, it says at the end of Genesis chapter 2, it says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." This beautiful union of two becoming one. And it says, "And the man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed." Now we tend to think of that the way I was just doing a premarital counseling session this week. Liz was sitting there with me, and we tend to think of that in that way. They were both naked and unashamed, right? Yeah. But that's not primarily the picture here. That's a piece of it. The whole picture is they are vulnerable. They are uncovered. They are unprotected because they don't need to be. They are completely safe with the other. They are in complete harmony in relationship. And as a result, there's no shame. It's all good. That's what we were designed for, that kind of vulnerability, safety, and joy. Pastor Dan Gregory, who I mentioned before, says this about the situation. In an environment of complete security, you can enjoy profound intimacy. Don't miss that. In an environment of complete security, you can enjoy profound intimacy. See, loneliness sits on a foundation of insecurity, and in order to feel connected, and this is a quote from a TED Talk, I wish I remember who said it. Okay, I don't, but I just remember this, and so I might not even get the quote perfect, but it's in order to feel connected, we need to be seen, heard, and valued. See, in the garden, Adam and Eve looking at each other, they were seen, they were heard, they were valued, they didn't have anything to worry about, they were completely secure, and as a result, they had profound intimacy. Fortunately, like we said, Genesis 3 happens where sin comes in. And we're left again with this idea that the only way now to dispel the darkness that sin has brought is to let the light in. God's original plan, and quite frankly his ongoing plan, was for his kids to walk in authentic relationships, true, real community with one another, with other humans. Remember, man was there with all the creatures, and that was before sin. So like the lion wasn't trying to eat him, and the mosquito wasn't trying to bite him, and there was none of that. And of all the brilliance of all that God had created, nothing outside of humanity was fit to be community with Adam. Humanity needs other humanity. That's what you've heard us say before. In Christianity, there's nothing as a Lone Ranger Christian. You cannot do it yourself. The phrase, "I love Jesus, but I really don't have any need for the church," that's not a valid for a Jesus follower. If that's your experience, first of all, I'm sorry for what the church has done to make you think that, for your experience in that way. But to follow Jesus, you still have to be with his family. That's what this is about. That's what we were designed for. And that's the original plan. And the Bible talks about how do we do that? But you have to understand that God's plan to reset what was broken starts in restoring the primary break. Remember, the primary break was between humanity and God, where humanity said, "I don't need to be in relationship with you. I can do it on my own." So what does God do? What's God's plan for restoring that? If you look in 2 Corinthians, in our New Testament of our Bibles, in the 5th chapter there, so the second letter that we have recorded of Paul writing to the Corinthian church, and chapter 5, he says this, starting in verse 20, "We are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. we implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. This is the idea of restoring what was broken. And this idea of reconciliation in our world today can be a little bit more difficult to explain. In years gone by, I would say it's like balancing a checkbook. All right? How many of you regularly balance a checkbook? Okay, about 20% in the room, okay? The rest of us, a checkbook is this little thing, there's paper and it rips out and you sign your name and write some numbers down and people take your money, okay? It's how you would pay for stuff. So, I'm with you now. I don't know where our checkbook is, okay? I don't. I'm with you. I do everything online. My wife knows, I don't. But the whole idea is in reconciling a checkbook, you would write this money on this paper and give it to people, which would represent money coming out of your account, and then you would have to figure out how much do I have in my checkbook that's recording this compared to what's actually in the bank, and if those things didn't line up, you had to reconcile them. You had to bring them back so that both sides matched. That's the picture here. That we need to be reconciled, where we've broken, we're offset from what God designed for us. He wants to put that back together, and we are being implored to be reconciled, meaning step into this. Not that we can do it. Christ has made the way. Jesus, the Son of God, paid the full penalty of sin that we couldn't pay except with an eternity separated from him. Christ paid it all because he loves us so dearly, offers that payment. What the Apostle Paul is saying here, accept the payment. It would be like in your checkbook if all of a sudden you looked at it and, man, I'm missing $1 billion. I don't know why you had $1 billion to start with, but I'm just going to say you were very lucky. You had $1 billion, but all of a sudden now you're missing $1 billion, so you owe $1 billion to make it right. What Jesus is offering is, I will pay for you. Or you could say, keep your money to yourself. I'll pay it myself. Those are the two choices you have. We're being implored to be reconciled. And it says, for our sake, he made him, Jesus, to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become this thing called the righteousness of God, the rightness of God, the perfect abiding condition of harmonious relationship between humanity and the divine. And also, if you look at it biblically across the scope of the pages of Scripture, righteousness also talks about right relationships between humanity and humanity. It's about restored relationship. That's becoming the righteousness of God. That's the original thing that's being set back in fixing this problem of loneliness. But next, it involves the condition that we're supposed to be in community. Look at Hebrews chapter 10, where the author of Hebrews says this, let us consider how to stir up. And first of all, I love that word stir. We think of stir like this, right? You're making a little vat of something. No, stir here, some of your translations might say spur. It was actually really a goad. Some of your translations might actually have that. It was a sharp stick that you could jam into an animal to get them moving, right? So, although we like stir up, because that seems so much gentler. Stir up one another, right? And obviously it is one another here. We're doing this with each other. We like stir up. This is more along the lines of create an irritant in someone else who's doing it the wrong way in order to get them where they need to be. That was the point of the goad here. Let us consider how to stir up one another. And remember, we talked all about there's so many one another's. We had a whole message series about that. Remember that last year? All those one another's we walked through. Not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some. We need to stir up. We need to encourage one another. This is the fix to the loneliness. We are called to be in relationship. We are called to gather together as God's family, because some have gotten into the habit of not doing it. And let me tell you, that's easy. It's easy to get into the habit of not connecting in with God's people. Like what you're doing right now here on Sunday morning. I bet everyone in this room had something else you could have done this morning, okay? Even if it was just sleeping in. Okay? I thought with my alarm this morning, we had a boxing match, and me and that snooze button went at it. And that meant I had to move real quick then when I'm like, okay, I can't hit that 4 times and be actually on time. So I get it. You could have just slept. You could have been with family. You could have been doing something with a club, or you could have gone out for brunch or something, So many things you could have done. And there's a habit you can get into of missing this and missing other community connections because of all the other stuff going on. But it's important for us to look at this. What does it mean to shine the light on our loneliness? We looked at the big picture that the Bible talks about doing it as, don't neglect to come together. Make sure you come together. The whole idea is have the habits of coming together, but doing it under the idea of being reconciled with God, having that initial break reset. So what does that look like for us, shining light on our loneliness? First of all, I think it means we need to rethink God. For many of us, it means we need to rethink how we picture or conceive of God. So much of our history, at least over the last several decades within the church, has been almost this moralistic push. Just do the right stuff and you'll be good enough for God. Just do the right stuff, you be the rules, and then you'll be okay. But when you step out of line, man, we're going to slap you on those fingers. You know, that ruler on the fingers if you dare step out of line. We need to understand that it's the whole idea of this reconciling. It's not about, well, I start doing enough good for God so I can be in. It's all about relationships, about God paying the price. It's not about rules, religion, or rituals. Those things don't get you okay. They don't reset the break. Those things happen, like following the rules and actually engaging in religious activities and having those rituals. Those flow out of having a right relationship. They don't get you in. They're a result of being in, of being made right. So if you're at a place where you think God's all about rules, just about if you do enough right, you can get in, or maybe you think I can't be good enough to be part of God's family, I want you to rethink that. I want you to rethink the very character nature of who God is, because if that's your picture of him, you don't know the Jesus that I know. We sang a song where we said, I want to speak the name of Jesus. If that idea of literally just speaking Jesus over people, of shouting who Jesus is over people, of living out what Jesus is and who he was and what he did, if that doesn't make you excited, I think you don't know the Jesus that I know. Because I get pumped. And there's others in this room I know who get pumped, who will sacrifice all kinds of stuff, because it's not even a sacrifice, because I get to do this because of who Jesus is, because of all he's given me. It's an overflowing of generosity, of gratitude, of generosity that flows out of gratitude. Again, something we'll talk about this fall. We're going to talk about what does it mean to really be grateful for what Jesus has done. But that's what we need to do. We need to rethink our just basic understanding of who God is. And we also need to replace our insecurity. See, so much of when it comes to my relating with other people, it is based on insecurity. Am I good enough for you? Can I really, really trust you? What if but if you only knew? We have all these questions, all these statements that create boundaries and distance. And when I move into relationships from a place of insecurity, of just doing it on my own, I usually do it in one of two ways. I do it to either prove myself that I'm good enough to be in a relationship with you, or I do it to protect myself from you because because I'm not safe. Remember, when you have complete security, you can have profound intimacy. When you don't have security, when you are not secure in yourself, then you have insecurity. You approach a relationship from insecurity. You either have to prove yourself or protect yourself. And that doesn't build for healthy relationships. But we need to find our true north of ourself, true north of our value, of being fully known and fully loved by God. Now, I know that sounds like a very pastory thing to say, right? Very, very churchy. But I don't throw it out there because of that. I throw it out there because I have found it to be the absolute truth. When my security is on the unbreakable foundation that God loves me because he made me, that I am valuable because he says I'm valuable, it's a concept we wrestle with, okay? We think things should be valuable that aren't, or that others don't value, and then we get upset about it. I remember back in the day when my grandmother's house was up for sale, and they were doing the auction, and they were selling some stuff. I had this conversation with my mom about, well, they only want this much for this furniture. I forget, was it Ethan Allen, I think? The Ethan Allen. It's so valuable. It costs so much. And I said, I hear you, Mama, but value is what people will pay for it, right? Ain't nobody gonna pay a few $1,000s for a 40-year-old cabinet, right? It's not gonna happen. People don't value it. And so when we're reliant on the value of others for us, I'm never secure. It's always shifting. But when I can walk into a situation saying my value is beyond the scope of words because I'm loved by the creator of the universe who says I'm worth it all, boom, nothing can rock me. Well, lastly, we need to be reviving connection. What do I mean by that? See, we've really messed up the ability to connect. We've lost so much. There's a science and there's an art to this connecting. And here's where I think we've lost some of the art of connection, kind of the making it beautiful. There's a death of conversation. We've perfected instead the one-way conversation. And that is some of what you see with some social media stuff. It's like, I will just talk at you, at you, at you, right? Here's all my words coming at you, but there's very little back and forth. There's very little speak to me. I'm just very good at telling you what I think. And I know that's really, really almost hypocritical of me because I'm standing up on stage and you all have to listen to what I'm saying right now, right? I get that. But in general, when we're having conversation, we tend to be one-sided because we've lost that art of conversation. But there's also a death of conflict resolution. In the world we live today, it's almost like conflict must be avoided at all costs, at least in resolving it. Like I can say whatever I want, but I can't fix, there's no, if we're opposing, what does it mean to come together? Because we've moved it to being all about winning rather than redeeming or restoring the relationship. The redeeming or the restoring of the relationship takes second, third, fourth, or fifth priority, and at the top is I must be right. And this is coming from a chronic I must be righter. I wrestle with that. The Lord has done lots of stuff in my life to bring some humility in there. It's knocked me down several pegs at several different junctures, and I'm grateful for it. I mean that very sincerely. Because all of us have this kind of, in our culture, I must be right, I must win, and if you're wrong, I must prove you're wrong, and that is the priority, not the preservation of the relationship. And there's also a death of real confession. We hide behind half confessions when we're in relationships. We sort of tell you a little bit about what's going on, but we don't tell you the full thing. I protect myself. When it's coming from insecurity, remember, I gotta protect myself. So I'm really not letting people in to see the dark places. And then kind of lastly, when it comes to the loss of the science of connection, where we need to revive it, we have lost our anchors. What does an anchor do? If you're in a boat and you throw an anchor over, what does it do?
Keeps you in place.
Keeps you in place. It keeps you in place. Hey, maybe you're at a good fishing spot and you want to stay there and be able to fish the right place. But if the water is choppy or maybe the wind's blowing and you can't necessarily get back to port, but there's some rocks over there. If you throw an anchor down, what does it do? Keeps you safe, keeps you from getting to the places that can cause damage. Keeps you in the good places, keeps you out of the bad. We have lost our anchors of connection. And I think we need to restore those. Now, not in a legalistic way, but I remember growing up, okay? Pretty much if the church doors were open, we were there. So Sunday morning, you had Sunday school, you had your Sunday worship gathering service, then there was a Sunday night thing, and then there was a midweek activity, and almost every weekend, for one thing or another, there was some event that you would go to. So we were at church like 4 or 5 times a week. My first job as a 14-year-old, because I couldn't get enough of the church building, was to work as a janitor at that church building, okay? Always there. And also my family was very involved with other stuff. So it wasn't like we were like weird culty people that only did church stuff. No, we were super involved in lots of stuff. But we had anchors that tied us to the life and the ministry of the church. Now, I'm not trying to say that you need to be here 4 or 5 times a week, okay? Don't hear me say that. But we have cut anchors and we say, you know what? It's not that important that I want to say one of the things that we can do to anchor ourselves to the kind of community that God wants us to be is to put in place those anchors, those rituals, those things that we do by habit over and over again to where relationship is happening at the church. I think that's incredibly important. Remember, the only way to dispel the darkness is to let the light in, and here's where on those anchors I want to end us with. See, loneliness requires connection to heal. You can't have connection by yourself. Okay? And by the way, if you are having connection by yourself, you really should go see a doctor because they have medication that can help with that. Real connection, seriously, real connection can only happen in community with others. And it's interesting because that study that we looked at Cigna, that we started with, they actually showed that too much of a good thing can also bring loneliness. And one of the things that they highlighted, and this might step on some toes in Lancaster County, too much time connecting with your family can cause loneliness. Too much. Now, I'm not saying don't connect with your family. They were saying when it was out of bounds. The same was true for work and for play and there's all these things that could be good, but if you do too much of them, that those actually create loneliness. That we need to connect to where the true connection is. And so I want to say prioritize gathering. I'm going to ask you over the next really 6 weeks or so, finishing up this series and walking through what we're calling Rhythm Next, if you would do an experiment. Would you be willing to say, I can make it to church every week for 6 or 7 weeks? I mean, let's think about it. That's one time a week for almost 2 months. I'm going to ask you to do that. Do that experiment. See if that doesn't build into you connection and squish down the loneliness. But I want to ask you to do one other thing, and that is consider our life groups. I want you to know, if you're not already part of a life group, that you probably have all the excuses in the world for why it's not right for you. And I want you to know that you are missing out. What happens in these life groups is real community. They're not perfect. You will not find a perfect life group. If you do find a perfect life group, don't join it because you'll mess it up, okay? Because people mess things up. We bring sin and junk in, but I want to say it's beautiful. The relationships that have been built, I know in ours, have been life-giving. I want to encourage you to push through that. I know my family, highly involved in all kinds of stuff growing up, super highly involved, extracurriculars and jobs, and I dated quite a bit. Don't ask for my mama for stories, okay? This was before I was a follower of Jesus, all right? Dated a lot, and yet we were still able to be at church 3, 4, 5 times a week for significant times. I know it's possible, and when you reconnect to those anchors of connection as the whole church, and then in these smaller communities, it will breathe life into the dark places. It will shine the light in. And then my last suggestion for you is to reach out to 2 people this week. 2 people. You make a proactive communication. Don't wait for someone to reach out to you, because so often we do that and then we say, well, why am I so lonely? Because we're waiting for people to reach out to us when we need to be the initiators. 2 people, one that's close, but pick somebody that you're not close with, okay? It can even be me. If you don't like me, that's fine. Reach out to me this week, okay? Let me know that you don't like me. That's okay. We can work on it. I love to self-improve. But whatever it is, reach out to someone who you're close to and someone you're not. And we'll try to give you some reminders this week about that as well. But the whole thing is, if we can reconnect into community, if we can reconnect into relationships, we kill loneliness in our souls. Here's one last thing Pastor Dan said, and then we're going to watch a video that I hope just is a little encouraging to you. The video is called Hold On, okay? And I think it's good advice. But here's what Pastor Dan said, wrapping up his message. In order to reconnect relationally, we need to find what it is we need to disconnect from in our schedules. To say yes to the priority of relationships means saying no to something else. So when it comes to every week on a Sunday or connecting with one of our life groups, you might be busy. You might be very busy, but in the midst of busyness, you can be incredibly lonely. You might be very committed to lots of things, but those commitments are keeping you from the true connection, the true community that you need in your life because you were designed for that. So to do what I asked you to do what I challenge you to do, I understand the ask. I'm asking you to say no to something else. But I want you to know, from my many years now of ministry experience, if you say yes to the priority of relationships, you will be blessed for it in ways that you can't even imagine right now.